Good evening, everyone, and welcome to the electric vehicle webinar. We acknowledge that we here are meeting you here tonight on the traditional land of the Kaurna people. We pay respect to their physical and spiritual connection to country. We respect the Kaurna heritage and acknowledge elders past, present, and emerging, and the continuing importance of living culture. So this here tonight is part of a series of events in collaboration with the regional climate partnerships of South Australia, Resilient East, Resilient South, Adapt West, and Resilient Hills and Coasts. We'll pop a link in the chat later so you can explore some of the great work of these partnerships another time. In tonight's webinar, we'll be delving into electric vehicles, what sort of home setup is required, and what things to look out for when you're looking at buying one. So I'm Beck Taylor from Campbelltown City Council, and this is my colleague, Kim Kueh. We'll facilitate the Q&A later on.
Speaking of, how do we use the webinar functions?
Great question, Kim. The chat function is on the bottom left-hand side of your screen. Simply click on the icon to use the chat. The Q&A function is on the bottom right-hand side of the screen. Similarly, click on that icon to open the window, type in your question and press enter. As you're going, if you look through the questions and you decide you like one of them and agree with that question being asked, you can click on it to vote for it by pressing the thumbs up icon, but hopefully we'll get to all questions. Raising your hand is in the middle of that bottom bar to indicate you'd like assistance from tech support. Your videos will not be put on tonight, just ours and the presenters. And this webinar is being recorded and will be made available on our council websites and YouTube channels to review and share later on. And also a version of slides will be accessible. So we'll also post information about that and how to contact Bryce later in the chat. Kim will now introduce our expert for tonight, Bryce Gayton.
So Bryce has been working in as well as writing and presenting on the EV sector since 2008. His current role involves writing for Australia's premier EV news site, The Driven, running the EV transition support consultancy, EV Choice, and providing EV build safety training to a number of Australian universities and Formula SAE race teams. In his spare time, Bryce writes on EV topics for Renew magazine, as well as regularly presenting on EV issues and opportunities at conferences, public EV information forums, and events. He's also the writer behind EV car model fact sheets and our website found on the Australian Electric Vehicle Association's national website. All right, Bryce now has 50 minutes to talk to you, so sit down, enjoy a cup of tea or your dinner, and write down your questions. Over to you, Bryce.
Thank you very much, Kim, and welcome to everyone here tonight. I'm going to talk tonight about what is an EV, talk about the wider EV transition to put it in context, give a little bit of history about EVs and what's happening in the broader place of EVs, Australian state of play and what's happening here and versus the world, and choosing an EV to suit you and some of the sort of things to look for and what's going to be coming to Australia in the near future, as well as some information sources that you can find as reliable. So first up, what is an EV? We in the EV area keep using all these acronyms, so I better explain them first. A PEV, or a plug-in electric vehicle, are the ones with plugs. The simplest of those is your BEV, the battery electric vehicle. And as you can see from your screen there, it has a battery, an electric motor, and as you brake, as you're slowing down, the regenerative braking means it regenerates electricity to recharge the battery slightly. So that will save you 10 to 20% of your electrical energy that you use to drive. And that's basically your electric battery vehicle. Second one along there is a plug-in hybrid electric vehicle. And these were around, basically designed when batteries are very expensive. So they come with much smaller batteries and basically use the plug-in, the electric component as a round town type component. And then if you're going longer trips, you can actually drive on the petrol motor. As has been found, as you'll see on the Australian Electric Vehicle website and on the Driven, I've written a couple of articles on these. Unless you're driving them really carefully and have a particular use case for using them, they in fact are as bad or worse than driving a petrol car. So, and as the price of the BEVs are coming down, the niche for PHEVs is getting smaller and smaller. So overseas, they're actually dropping in sales numbers year on year now for the last 12, 18 months. So there are your two plugins. The next one along is your hybrid electric vehicle, the HEV. This is your Toyota Priuses and Camrys and those types of one. As you can see there, they only refuel via a petrol pump. And they, when the coming sales bans are coming for in overseas countries, Norway in particular is banning them in 2025, they don't make the cut the mustard or make the cross the hurdle, so to speak. They will not be, they're included as petrol car and will not be available for sale after 2025. In a number of other countries, those dates will be 2030, 2035. So they die when those petrol car sales end. And there's also the hydrogen car or the fuel cell electric vehicle. They don't burn hydrogen in the combustion chamber like a normal car. They, in fact, are an electric vehicle just like the others, but they use a chemical reaction with hydrogen to they'll create electricity, and basically the waste product is water. There is an issue with them as they're using probably 3 to 5 times as much electrical energy to create the hydrogen in the first place, as well as the difficulties to find somewhere to refuel. So I'll make a big call here tonight that the hydrogen car is pretty much not going to happen, although there's still a number of companies that are still playing with it, and I'll talk a little more about that in a moment. Anyway, so there are your 4 types of electric vehicle around at the moment. It's BEV, FEV, HEV, and FSEV. By the way, electric vehicles are not a new phenomenon. That's a 1906 electric vehicle. It's that old, it actually has a tiller rather than a steering wheel, and a very well-dressed lady showing how easy it is to recharge their car. Slightly dangerous-looking connections, but they have been around since the turn of the last century. In fact, the first car to reach 100 kilometres an hour was in fact electric in 1897. In those days, around the turn of last century, a third of all cars were electric in sales, a third of all cars were internal combustion, petrol, and a third of them were actually external combustion or steam. And I tend to suggest that the fuel cell car is a bit like the steam car. It has all sorts of issues in terms of refueling and other things coming along that will slow it down and develop it. The electric car is pretty much where the petrol car was 100 years ago. In those days, you couldn't get electricity outside of major CBDs, but nowadays you get electricity anywhere. Whereas in those days, you could cart a 2-gallon drum of petrol anywhere. And that's how basically the petrol car won at that stage. Electricity has now got everywhere. So that's now the technology is advanced and electricity is advanced. This is pretty much the time for the electric car. By the way, I keep talking about cars rather than all these other things, but there are in fact lots of other things that will be turning to electric. If we're to get off fossil fuels as a transport mode or transport fuel, we need to change everything. So trucks are one of the first that will be changing, and there's a number of them coming. That's a Tesla truck shown there on the top. And then the second one is the conversion type trucks that SEA here in Victoria, because I'm based in Victoria, is converting new trucks and doing very large rubbish trucks and what have you conversions. There is machinery. Yes, mining machinery is going electric, and that's starting to happen now. There's tractors. That's John Deere's experimental tractor. In 2026, they are to be released. You'll also see the electric Bobcat there that was shown in January last year, and that will be soon available. Bicycles, for those of you who live in the cities or in a larger town, you'll be finding that the Deliveroo bicycles will be trying to run you over in every direction. Who hasn't yet? Motorbikes, yes, that's the Harley-Davidson Livewire. They're selling quite well. And there's one near me that I often see plugged into a DC fast charger. Electric planes, yes, they are a real thing. That one with the blue sky showing there is an electric flight trainer, and there's a number of those being used here in Australia already. That other one there, the 9-seater 2-pilot aircraft showing there, that's in its flight trials, and that's called the Alice, and that's basically hoping to be registered for, what do they call it, certified later this decade. There are, in fact, single-person vertical takeoff and landing, call it a flying car, if you will. This is one called the Black Fly and is registered for sale in the US already. Ultimately, they expect that to become an autonomous vehicle. You just book it, it'll turn up and land near you, hop in, and it'll take you to where you want to go. Autonomous cars that'll drive you without having to have any steering or pedals. That one is built here in Victoria again, out in the east of Melbourne, and that's overseas that are being trialled. Buses are a very big thing overseas. We have not as many in Australia, sadly, but it's slowly happening. I think there's one, the example I often use is one of the Chinese cities that changed their entire fleet of buses, 10,000 of them, over to electric a couple of years ago now, and are doing quite well at it. Ferries, yes, that is a 30-car, several hundred passenger ferry that does a regular run up around the Scandinavian countries, has a 4 megawatt-hour battery, and it's basically 80% less running costs, very quiet, no fumes. People love it. And there's dozens of them on order and many more and being used at the moment. And general equipment, that's a ride-on lawnmower. The councils are snapping those up. They will basically drive all day, the amount of use that they get, and they'll recharge overnight on a power plant. So yes, we must get off fossil fuels in everything. And I haven't even mentioned all the garden equipment and everything else. These days it's electric. Now, transitions, we've gone through them before. We've had them many a time. Think of the mobile phone, think of computers. This is the last transport transition back around the turn of last century. And there's those famous two photos. You'll see April 1900. This is Fifth Avenue in New York, a fairly affluent area, so they're going to change fairly early. But you see in 1900, one horseless carriage, one internal combustion car amongst all the horses and carriages. 13 years later, you can just see the tail of one horse-drawn carriage and everything else is internal combustion. That's how fast the transitions can happen. And this is the sort of curve coming up. That's pretty much the sort of technology curve of any adoption that happens. So be it phones, microwaves, color TVs. If you're ever feeling really bored, ourworldindata.org, and you can select your technologies and your timeframes. It's rather fun to play with. But you can see this characteristic curve starts off relatively slowly, takes off as everybody starts getting into it, and then tapers off at the end as the last people buy in. And the old technology is either left out or this new one is taken over. That curve is what electric vehicles are doing, and that's showing to 2021. 2022 was about 12%. This is worldwide numbers. In Europe, it's about 1 in 4 cars are now sold with a plug on them. In Norway, it's over 90% because their cut-off date for selling, the last date for selling passenger light commercial and passenger cars is 2025, and they're pretty much game over. In England, as another example, it's 24% of all sales come with plugs, and the full batteries are taking bigger and bigger share, and now are up to about 16.7, 17%, and the other 6-7% is plug-in hybrids and folding. Another acronym, EVSE, Electric Vehicle Supply Equipment. These are the things that you use to recharge your car. Technically, the AC types I'm talking about are not a charger. They're in fact just a controlled power point to provide power to the car when it needs it. The actual conversion from AC to DC to charge the DC battery happens inside the car. You have a built-in charger. But I've given up not calling them car chargers, so I'll call them all car chargers. The first one at the top left of your screen is the sort of one that comes with your car. Almost all cars come with them. Some of the like commercial vehicles coming in don't come with them because they sort of need the one shown below, and they leave you to buy that one. Or I bought one of that type for myself for longer trips. Quite handy on a 3-phase outlet that I can get a much higher rate of charge. And I'll talk about the speed of charging in a moment. The best way to charge at home is actually put in a proper charger, as in a full called mode 3 charger. And there's 2 types. There's the plug-in or BYO socket one, that's favored by councils and that type of business type one where you look after the lead and they don't have to maintain it. Where I go to places where there are leads attached to them, the leads are often quite damaged. It's like the air hoses in a petrol station. They get driven over, kicked around. They don't cop a very easy life. So that's why the councils like to use them. But for your own use, I always recommend a tethered lead as in one with it's tied to the box. It's just much easier. You don't have to sort of roll the lead up, put it back in the boot or dry it off. You just hang it around the box and take off. As I keep jokingly saying, when people ask how long does it take to charge, I say about 20 seconds, about 10 seconds to plug in when I get home, another 10 seconds unplug in the morning and just wrap it around the box. That's your AC ones. The charger inside the car converts the AC electricity to DC that the battery wants. And those things will take some hours to recharge, and I'll talk about that in the next slide. But the key detail is if you're on the highway, that's way too slow. On the highway, these are the things you use. These are DC fast chargers, and these are true chargers because the conversion from AC to DC is done in those big boxes. And then it converts and basically provides DC power direct to the battery, and they are multiple times faster charging your car, and you can be charged in some cases in 10-15 minutes, as I'll talk about on the next 2 slides up, as you'll see. So there's basically 50 to 350 kilowatt speeds, as opposed to home chargers are around 7. That little plug-in one on the top right is about 2 kilowatts. So you can get sort of different charging speeds. That's the key point. Another question I often get about charging is bidirectional. Can my car be used to provide power to the home or to other things? Can I plug things into the car? Well, there's 3 layers of that. It's called vehicle to load, V2L. You'll see that coming out in more cars at the moment. There is V2H, or vehicle to home, and that's providing power to the house, but not out into the grid. So it's basically behind the meter. You can run your house on it, but you can't, like solar cells, you can't put it out into the street like your solar cells can. But vehicle to grid, V2G, you can. And that's where the car actually becomes a little power supply that the grid can use to stabilize itself. And you might get offered different electricity tariffs to provide some sort of buffering by your car to the grid. Everybody keeps wondering, when can I do it? Well, it's a little while. By the way, V2X, you'll often see, is just a generic symbol for those. Currently, CHAdeMO, which was designed in 2012 in Japan, and Japan has earthquakes, tsunamis, all sorts of things. And that was designed by the car companies in conjunction with TEPCO, or Tokyo Electric Power Company, to provide that backup power from day one. It was just designed into the system. And that's that big round plug on your left, and the AC charging plug is on the right. However, CHAdeMO lost what I call the plug war. The CCS, the Combined Charging System 1, that's the picture of one in my corner. As you can see, the AC plug is actually a combination there with the two big pins that are used for charging DC, and that hasn't had vehicle to X built in from day one, but it is being built in, and it's been developed to do it in 3 stages: V2L, V2H, V2G. Some of them are doing V2L already, and most will be offering that within the next 12, 18 months. Be 2025, 26 before your vehicle to grid, vehicle to home systems will be available. The first of them will be capable of it later this year, early next year. The VWs, when they arrive, are supposedly going to be coming with it built in. It's then a matter of getting the boxes built that you can put on the house, because it's a fairly relatively expensive process to put the box in to actually do the changeover between the car and the house, or the car and the grid. And then they've got to get licensed to be connected. And that's they're not talking with the Australian states. I'm going to get back together to talk about it till about 2025. So 2025-6 before you can do it. So if you want to do it, yes, you can do vehicle to load now, and it's really handy. I've borrowed a few cars, the Kias and the Ioniq 5, for instance, the Hyundai Ioniq 5. It will provide you up to 15 amps. And we've run full electric barbecues, induction cooktops, and lighting for an evening session, EV information session was running for that. Whereas the couple of the Atto 3, the BYD Atto 3 and the MG will also do it, but they're only about 1800 watts, about half. So they'll provide lighting and small power, but they won't do the full barbecue effect. The key point with electric vehicle is we're used to this. We drive to our destinations, and somewhere along the way we'll go out of our way, stop for a while, refuel, wind, rain, hail, or sunshine, and add that time to our trip. That's what we're currently used to, and we sort of don't realize that it is actually quite inconvenient, because when it comes to electric cars, our destination is our charging point. We don't have to go out of the way. We just, 96% of the time, roughly, is the car sits around doing nothing. Therefore, if it's doing nothing, may as well make use of that time. So when you get to your library, your shops, park, work, home, just plug it in and go away and do your thing while it does its. And that's the whole point. It's just, you're not losing time anymore. And as I said, 96% of the time the car sits around, and as I'll talk about a bit later, about 89% of that charging is done at home. So that home charging is 89% of those stops that you used to do there, you now don't need to do at all. So what happens? Basically, it's, think of your mobile phones, plug and ignore. Plug it in, let it do its thing. It's not, be your fuel pump attendant. So once you make that shift, you very rapidly learn to hate petrol stations and find them very inconvenient places to go to. I do, however, have my own little battery electric tyre pump, because that's one thing I do miss from petrol stations. How fast do I need to charge at home? That's another big question I get. Because of this paradigm is changing, and yet you get different speeds depending on how fast you want to be charged. If you're doing less than 100 Ks in a day, a power point will do the job, and that will do 2 kilowatts if you're using 5, 10 kilowatt hours in a day. 2, 3, 4, 5 hours, you'll be charged. Less than 8 hours, you'll be fully charged again. And to put one in is about $500 up installed, but it must be on its own dedicated circuit back from the switchboard. That's the Appendix P in the new wiring rules recommends that, and it will ultimately become mandatory to be done that way. And it's just very good practice to do it that way. By the way, avoid using extension leads portable chargers. That was one charging event with a what do you call it? BMW i3 a friend of mine had, and he showed me this basically burnt plug from one charging event when it just failed. And it got a little bit hot, and as it gets hot, the resistance increases, which is increasing temperature, which is just cascades into basically burnt plug. So yes, never use the extension lead with a portable charger unless it's been very carefully checked. And within range of one car charge, 400 plus Ks for my Kona, it's your wall box type one, and that will do basically 8-9 hours a full charge from 0 to 100, but you very rarely ever charge that at that space. The next slide, which I'll show you in a moment, by the way, that sort of charger costs $700-800 basic prices. So you're looking at about $1,500 all up. This is my little table that I've drawn up to give you an idea of how fast you can charge. Your AC charging, your power point, you'll get 16 kilometers charged an hour, very roughly. This is sort of based on my Kona efficiency, which is a pretty average number. For 15-hour power points or a caravan outlet, that'll give you 24 kilometers charged, 100 Ks in 4 hours, which overnight, that'll give you 2 hours, 200, 300 Ks to recharge. Again, pretty handy, even if you just put a 15 amp outlet in and use a slightly higher power portable charger. And your home charger, well, depends on what size the charger in your car is. My Kona has a 7.4 kilowatt charger built into the car. So my maximum speed I can get is roughly fill at 50 kilometers charged an hour. And that'll give me 9 hours full recharge from 0 to 100. Most cars now are coming out with 11 kilowatt AC chargers to DC chargers built into the car. So if you have 3-phase at home, you can get 73 kilowatts charged. My partner's Renault Zoe has 22 kilowatt AC charging, and it can pretty much get a full charge in about 2.5-3 hours. That's if you have 3-phase. Most houses don't. So for home use, 7 kilowatt home charger is pretty much perfect. If you want to get that full charge overnight. If you're not doing many Ks, 15 or 10 is fine. On the road, then you're looking at, there's 3 chargers there. There's a 50, 150, and a 350. Those first 2, by the way, are actually built here in Australia by Tritium. They're one of the biggest manufacturers in the world of car chargers. If you're using a 50 kilowatt charger, you can get 20 minutes, 100 Ks. So even if you've forgotten the charger overnight, and you only need an extra 50 Ks, 10-minute top up. If you would have some of the modern cars with 11 kilowatt charging, although 150 kilowatt DC charging, you'll get 6 minutes for 100 K. So if you forgot the charge overnight and you just want to get a quick top up on the way to work, 5 minutes. Some of the cars coming out now are doing 220, 250 kilowatt charging. So that's at 350 maximum charge there. The Porsche Taycan working towards 350 now. 2 minutes for 100 Ks. They'll recharge. A Hyundai Ioniq 5, for instance, will do 0 to 80% charge in 18 minutes. People often ask me this other question is, how far can I go on a charge? There are 3 ways of calculating the estimates, and these are government mandated systems around the world. NEDC, not even distinctly close is probably a good name for that acronym, is the old European standard, still regularly quoted here because we haven't updated our fuel quality, fuel efficiency standards, which I'll come back to later. It's 30% too high, is pretty much. If you see NEDC, take off 30%. It says 557 by Kona. I've got Buckley's are getting that. Same for a Nissan Leaf 40 kilowatt hour. You would never get 315 out of it. However, Europeans came up with a much better standard, and that was based on sort of mainly city, middle to outer suburban use, and it's pretty good. So a Nissan Leaf will do 285 around town. I find in my Kona, I can get probably 500, 520 Ks around town if I'm just beetling around in sort of low speed traffic. So 484 is a very, very good estimate for around town. So if you're doing mostly that sort of driving, look for the WLTP number. However, if you're doing middle to outer suburban and regional driving, then the US EPA number, because Americans would drive further and longer and higher speeds, so their standards are a little bit different. My Kona, they say, will do 413. That's about right. I get about 420 around a country road in Victoria. Heading Melbourne to Perth, probably around 390, 400, because I basically zoom up to 110K and stay there for the day. So that's not particularly good for the efficiency. But that gives you an idea of the numbers. Again, it doesn't matter which standard you use, so long as you're comparing cars on the same standard. So at least you can get relativities, even if they're all on NEDC. WLTP is pretty much a good number for suburbanites, and for country people, probably the US EPA. The fact sheets that I'll mention a bit later, I list all three of those numbers if they're available. And there's more detail at Renew edition 155. I've detailed a lot more information about those estimates and how to use them. Cost to run an EV? Well, basically cheap. That's the short answer. Here are some numbers that want to do a bit of mathematics and number crunching. Renault Zoe, my partner has one of those, do 10,000 Ks a year if you did that much sort of distance, charging off peak. So we'll just pick a round number of 20 cents a kilowatt hour, and we'll compare it to a 2022 Corolla. At 6 litres per 100 kilometres, both those numbers come from the Green Vehicle Guide, Australian Green Vehicle Guide. So they are NEDC numbers, but again, I'm using horse like for like, so that's okay. And Zoe, I would use about $266 worth of electricity versus internal combustion engine Corolla, $1,200. So I'm saving $934. For those of you who live in, or those of you who know people living in Victoria, we have the fun of the, I'll just quickly jump there, the EV road tax, which your government in South Australia very kindly dumped before they even started it, as they realised it's still got issues. There's lots of unfairnesses built into it at the moment. So we shall see what happens about that one. But yes, we have that. Hopefully you won't get one of those in South Australia unless it's better based than the Victorian one. But you'll also be saving on your service costs too. So that's about $250 a year. So all up, you're going to save $900 to $1,000 every 10,000 Ks. If you're running off your own solar, well, it's even bigger saving. I often talk about, does an EV go the distance, or the old political campaign 2019 when Scott Morrison and others said, they'll ruin the long weekend. Well, if we look back to the early days of the petrol car, they didn't get a petrol pump until 25 years after the first internal combustion engines came about. Before that, 2-gallon tins. And that's basically how the petrol car won over electric, because there wasn't electricity supply outside of the big cities. We don't realize how quickly electricity has rolled out around the world, and actually how recent an innovation it is. However, now, if you look at, quickly to that, the South Australian map, those orange dots, I've used what's called plug share. It's a really good way of finding charges. You can filter for all sorts of charges. I've just filtered for one, which is the DC fast charges. So when you're driving around Australia, the East Coast and all around New South Wales, through Victoria, right up through to Cairns, I think, in Queensland. And there's more going in all the time. So it's probably almost time I re-screen captured this from PlugShare. And as you can see from South Australia, I'm still not convinced the South Australian government realises that people want to drive an EV north or west of Adelaide. As I found when I drove to Perth, it's certain issues involved in getting across, but you can do it. I did it in 6 full days with a half day at each end. So basically 8 days all up from Melbourne to Perth, and then the same back again. There's this DC desert between Adelaide and Madra Pass in WA. As you can see there, WA is now installing a whole lot more, and I believe there's a number coming up across that gap at the moment, as well as going north. But anyway, plugshare.com is where you find your chargers, and actually lists what type of charger it is, and you can filter for the AC chargers, faster chargers, whatever. And then each of the electric companies themselves that provide these chargers, Charge, Fox, EV, and a couple of others, they have their own websites for actually logging in and using them. So there's me, the eastern end of the Nullarbor Plain when I drove over to Perth. Actually, it was this time last year, a long weekend. Last year, I drove across to Perth to do this, run the safety training for the universities over there. You build their Formula SAE race car each year. And they were just starting to convert to building electric race cars for the annual competition. So that's me on the way back. So the car's looking a little bit dirty, so a month later. And everyone that drives an EV to Perth along the south coast gets used to the Poochera pub. In the case of my Kona, it has a 7 kilowatt built-in charger. So it's a 3-hour wait to do that Port Augusta through to Ceduna Hop. If I had 11 kilowatt charger, because that's a 3-phase out that he's happy to provide people with, it would be 2 hours there. And if I had a 22 kilowatt charger built into the car, it'd be 1 hour there. So my next EV, that is number one criterion, is to have 22 AC charger. But it's basically, I'm a bit like the third Leyland brother sometimes. So for most people, 7 kilowatts is fine. But that just gives you an idea of the differences. For the future, well, most of your charging is done at home. 80 to 90% is done at home. From there, is your workplace, or in that case, your workplace or shopping centres or your local council park. That one's actually from in Hayward Park in Adelaide. And that picture I swiped from PlugShare, because they actually have pictures of the charges. By the way, finding charges at the moment is still a bit like playing Where's Wally. There is no standard sign for finding an AC or DC or any charger. So PlugShare is relatively helpful, but the photos are often the way to find them because there are very poor signage. I'm working on an Australian Standards Committee at the moment and pushing the fact that we really need to come up with some standardised signs. So hopefully soon we'll see on the road signs like those big signs on the freeways where they have the petrol stations time symbol, caravan park symbol, eating symbol. There will be an EV charging symbol. Anyway, that's DC chargers then come in, and then you've got the closed networks like Tesla, although they're opening that network up at the moment overseas, and will be doing so at some stage in Australia because they use the same plug now as everybody else, that CCS plug. There's the NRMA network that until fairly soon into the future is still free, although they will be adding a price on that. But for members, I believe it will still be free. So if you're in maybe your RAA, you'll still be entitled to free use of them. And there's the Charge Foxes and EVs as well. That's one in Barnawartha North, just south of the Victoria-New South Wales border. Most of the time, I'm still the only person that turns up to these charges, even on busy weekends. When I drove across to Perth, for instance, it was generally, even in the Franklin Street hub in Adelaide, I was pretty much one amongst the many cars there, and there was no queuing for them. So barriers to BEV adoption, battery electric vehicles. Well, they've got the range now. Kona, as I said, 484, the new Kona coming out is going to be around 500. Number of cars are now going over 500. Tesla long range Model 3 is 600. So range is no longer a barrier. Performance, well, pretty much they'll beat the pants off any internal combustion engine car, even a Renault Zoe at 8 point something seconds. The Nissan Leaf, at 8 seconds. The Volvo C40, 4.7 seconds is its party trick. Jaguar Place, 4.5. So performance is definitely not a holdback for buying one. Choice, even in Australia, we've got 38 plus passenger vehicles and about another 10 like commercials. We're about to break the 50 barrier. And overseas, many countries, there are 100 and something available. Cost, second-hand, 10K up. You can pick up some of the cheaper, older iMeves for that, but the prices are being pushed up at the moment due to shortage of supply. New 45Ks, 46K on the road. I'll talk more about that in a minute. So price parity is coming. The cost is probably less a barrier than it used to be. Charging, or as I said, one size fits all. You don't have to stand around and wait for 9 hours at a DC fast charge, a petrol station type charger. You just plug it in and do it at home, or you get your 10, 15, 20-minute charge. Even in my Kona, it's probably 30-minute charge on the highway, and I'll top it up. And that's just about the right time for a toilet stop, coffee, just general relax. I did Melbourne to Sydney recently in one day, left at 5 a.m. in the morning, and I was there at 4 p.m. in the afternoon. 2 main charging stops and an extra 20-minute freebie, just to have a quick break in the middle. So charging is definitely not an issue for buying a BEV. The elephant in the room, though, is basically policy. And that basically means, will the government support putting in charging? Will it give you subsidies? Will it put taxes on them? And that means it will encourage or discourage manufacturers to bring them. That's choice. And more to the point, availability. If at the moment or up until recently, the manufacturers have said, well, we can make more money selling our EVs in Europe, where we get paid a bonus to sell them and have to pay a penalty to sell a petrol car, and therefore they do far better selling them overseas. So why bring them here apart from just basically a footprint at the moment? So basically promoting EV uptake involves 3 things. Carrots, EV subsidies. Sticks, start sort of coming up with ways to discourage people from buying them or manufacturers bringing petrol cars here. And policy, basically increasing availability. And some examples are, New Zealand have tax exemptions, including their road user charge, which applies to all vehicles there, except EVs until they reach a certain percentage. Various countries and various states of Australia all offer various subsidies. I believe South Australia is a $3,000 subsidy. Queensland is now $6,000. There's some, what do you call it, registration exemptions. I think it's 3 years in South Australia, similar sort of number in ACT. In Victoria, we get $100 off our rego, but we do have to pay the EV tax, and they just pulled the EV subsidies. So I'm not quite sure what's going on here, but I won't go on about that. Sorry about that. And in the UK, they have a number of different incentives. They'll actually do up to about $25,000 in dollar terms for buying electric trucks, for instance, as well as developing industries. I wrote an article on this start of last year about that. So I'm writing a very slow series about different countries and their subsidies and policies. There is, by the way, a big stick, and that's the bans on internal combustion engine sales. As you can see there, Norway's the one that kicked off the start of it, and it's 2025, so the year after next. A number of countries, 2030, 2035. Even some US states are setting it. And I should actually update that one, I realised, because there's several more states that come in on numbers. And recently, EU actually agreed all across the EU be 2035 cutoff date. And as a consequence, Norway was hitting high 80s last year, so several years ahead of it, and it's probably about to bust 90-something% EV sales. So that's basically what that end date has done. Policy, well, we have a national electric vehicle strategy that was just released here in, so overall, I had jokingly, before this government was elected, said we had basically an electric vehicle policy that was based on a rowing 8 where the coxswain had fallen overboard. So each state was doing what it thought was the right thing and busily paddling in the wrong direction or different directions to the others. We needed a coxswain, a national strategy. So the national strategy is more motherhood statements and actual policies, apart from things like the fringe benefits tax and different luxury car tax thresholds and things like that. So they're fairly minor, but it is basically setting the direction so that the other states can continue to row in the right direction. We can all go forwards. So yeah, national EV fleet targets is one of them. Government fleet purchasing, because 50% of all new cars sold are into fleets. So fleets buy EVs, then when they turn them over, that's where most people buy their second-hand, really recent model cars. So the ACT, for instance, has said they will buy only EVs by the next year or two, I think, and they'll turn them over fast to get that into the second-hand market quickly. And I believe the SA government set like 2025 or so to do those sort of numbers as well. Funding for education familiarisation campaigns. One of the big things that VW did itself a favour by doing the Dieselgate, have you heard of that, where they cheated on the diesel emissions standards. So they, instead of paying $6 billion worth of fines in the US, they said, oh, we'll spend 2.7, I think, billion, 2.3, somewhere around there, $1 billion rolling out EV infrastructure, EV information campaigns, support the installation of chargers in apartments and other AC systems where it's actually difficult to put them in or can be difficult. And then pivoted to building more and more electric cars. So Dieselgate did them a massive favour there, but education familiarisation campaigns are a very useful thing to have. Tenancy laws, a right to charge, so you can actually request in a apartment block and that type of thing to say that the body corporate can't say no to putting in a charger. Building codes, that's just recently been updated for EV ready, and there's a number of policies, and one of which I was part of a consortium that wrote for the ACT government on building codes to EV ready. Public charging infrastructure is just supporting it as it's being rolled out, not used as much as it will be into the future. So that is a role for government there. Industry plans, I said the UK were doing something as well there. Now I'm going to quickly explain this one. It's relatively straightforward, although this is all about to happen nationally. It's just this fuel efficiency standard, so-called, is made up of 3 things. And I think I'll answer the question of which came first, the chicken or the egg in the process. So the chicken, that's the greenhouse emissions. We don't want to be putting out too much carbon dioxide and warming the world. The egg is vehicle pollution standards. We don't want to pollute. We want the cars to meet the standards that the world already builds to. Euro 6D is probably the biggest one. And it's, given we sort of a lot of cars from Europe, we would like to be able to bring those cars here, but we can't because our fuel quality is really bad. So the squash dinosaur in the room is fuel quality. If we don't have good fuel quality, and ours is terrible, we can't have the vehicle pollution standards Euro 6D, because if we bring a Euro 6D car to Australia, you'll either clog up the motor or burn out the exhaust system and destroy the catalytic converter, because the fuel that we use is just too poor for those engines to support it. For the petrol ones, the diesel ones can at the moment, but for some reason or other, we are not bringing 6D diesel vehicles, you know that, but that's another story. So it's a 3-step process. We need really good quality fuel before we can get the vehicle pollution standards. Then we can implement greenhouse emissions limits. And what's happened is fuel efficiency standards are being used as the grab-all term to put all 3 together. So what they need to be able to do is agree on improving our fuel quality, which will then give us a lever to improve the fuel economy and decrease greenhouse gas emissions. So that's sort of the basics of it. This is what will be coming out in policy sometime in the next month or 2. Fingers crossed. We want a fuel economy, fuel efficiency standard with good fuel quality to basically force the manufacturers to start bringing them here. And by doing that, receive credits if they sell more EVs. So they get in Europe something like $20,000 credit for selling a battery electric vehicle. They get fined of about $4,000 if they sell a petrol car, and supposedly the 2 numbers are supposed to balance out each year, and they adjust those numbers to become more and more battery electric vehicle over the years. And that's the way their system works, and therefore it makes them $20,000 to sell the same EV that they built in Europe than it is to sell it here. So why would they bring them? So they have enforcement, that's at those penalties. We have a minimal sort of thing that's been agreed by the manufacturers, and it's voluntary. So the next question is, when will there be only EVs to buy? These manufacturers have all seen the writing on the wall. So it's a year after next, Jaguar will be all EV. Volvo said they will be all EV in Australia 2026. They'll be all EV in the world 2030. And they're working on a supply chain that will be zero carbon as well. So the car will have no carbon debt even when it hits the road for the first time, because their factories and all their materials will be sourced. So they're working towards that. VW doing the same. So it's not just Volvo, VW, and a number of other manufacturers all working towards that goal of being carbon neutral with their manufacturing process. And then you can drive your carbon neutral car, hopefully running on green energy, green electricity, and basically avoiding the greenhouse gas emissions. And all of these manufacturers are basically setting dates. So there'll be a time when you can't buy one. Moving right along. There we go. Oops, overshot. So what's coming to Australia in the near future? Well, that'll be quite a lot. If you look at the sheets that I'll talk about in a moment, I list all of the cars that are here, as well as all the ones that will be coming in the next 12 or 18 months that are relatively well confirmed. Fiat 500e will be here fairly soon. What others going to be here? The GWM Aura will be here within whatever today's date is, the 15th, next 1 week. You'll actually be able to place an order for one of those. Renault Megane E-Tech will be arriving here late this year. Ford Mustang Mark E will be arriving sometime in the second half of this year, so H2. Nissan have the Aria, which has been put off, so we will have to wait and see. For all those who remember the Nissan Leafs, when they first arrived here, we kept being delayed until they finally turned up years later. Same thing's now happening to the Aria, but it's supposedly getting here late this year. VW are bringing the first of their vehicles late this year, and they are very well received overseas. The ID3 maybe, or likely, the ID4 definitely. Hyundai, in the meantime, have actually been selling here for 4 years. I had my Kona 4 years this month, and they're actually bringing out a whole new model. So all these other manufacturers haven't brought anything here yet, like Peugeot or VW. Hyundai are bringing out a second generation Kona late this year. And MG4, I think, will be, I keep saying, the bargain of 2024, 2023, and possibly 24. Very good specifications, very efficient vehicle, well worth a look at when it turns up in the third quarter of this year. And it will probably, or in fact, it will be about $45,000 plus the on-road costs. Big thing this year, though, has been the BEV utes and vans. And I've just listed that, all the ones that are worth looking at, or you can look at. A whole pile of them actually just arrived in the last few months. The LDV ET60 dual cab ute has been available for sale since the start of this year. And the people I know that have them are really happy with them. LDV E-Deliver, probably a little under-spec at the moment, but yes, you can buy one of those. They're not cheap. Interestingly, by the way, the LDV ET60 is for sale in New Zealand for $79,990 New Zealand dollars on the road. In Australia, it is $93,000 plus the on-road costs. So you're looking at about $25,000 Australian difference in price. I have yet to get an explanation for why that is the case. The Ford E-Transit, I actually had a loan of one of those about a month ago. and they are a very impressive full electric van with good range. The Mercedes EQV People Mover and Van are already here now. Renault are bringing 2 within next month or 2. They're a fully updated Renault Kangoo van, as well as their master van. And there's a number of others there. The Photon will be arriving later this year. Oh, actually, no, H1. That should be here fairly soon. There's a number there that I've shown overseas. The Utes, dual cab Utes, are getting to be quite popular in America, and there's a number of them for sale. The Ford F-150 Lightning, they basically released for orders, pre-orders, and they had to close the books within, I think, a month or so, because they had taken 200,000 orders, and that was initially 3 years worth of building. So they had to double and then double again their production schedule in order to meet the demand. So price, yes, when can you afford one? First vehicle segments predict to reach price parity, so equivalent to the middle sort of range of price cars, you know, your $30,000 car, high 30s, somewhere around next year. And that's prediction has been around for a while, and if anything has been moving closer to more recent numbers. As you can see, the price of battery is the big thing. And back in 2016, half the car price was battery. By 2030, it will be 16%, and it will actually be cheaper to build an electric car than equivalent petrol. So by the end of this decade, they should be quite reasonably priced. Probably by next year, you'll start seeing the $40,000 price barrier broken. This year, we've seen the $50,000 fairly well broken by about half a dozen, well, maybe 3, 4, probably 5 cars by the end of the year. Maybe 6, actually, maybe a half dozen. EVs benefit the environment and you by the following. No tailpipe, so you can stand in front of, or behind it, I should say, and not get choked. Overall emissions, if people are reading Renew magazine every 5 years, I've been doing this now, I do a greenhouse gas carbon account for running an electric vehicle on grid electricity, so just ordinary grid electricity without your own solar or anything else. And it gets better year by year. In Tasmania, as you can see there, it is 0.23 versus 1.5 tonnes for an equivalent ICE internal combustion engine Corolla. Even in Victoria with the brown coal, it's still less, and it's getting better as the years go by, and they're getting rid of the brown coal power stations. As you say, with your own solar, well, it's negligible emissions altogether, so you get it right down to it, close to zero. And you also don't have all those coolants, oils, plugs, filters. I still service my partner's children's cars, and it's just annoying at all that oil and filter. I'm looking forward to the day of changing theirs over as well. And for you, well, the service costs are definitely reduced. They need a lot less materials, well, all that oil and plugs. My Kona gets serviced once a year, 15,000 Ks, and it's $160, 165, correction. And it's going to be that price, I think, for the next, or for the first 10 years. And for that, I get basically any service recalls done. I get all the maps updated, and I basically do a safety check. There's very little to do. The brakes don't wear out anywhere near as much because that regenerative braking provides energy back into the battery rather than wearing out the brakes and pads, so they last a lot longer. In fact, I have a Mitsubishi i-MiEV at the moment as a sort of a spare play car in a way. Its front discs have rusted up, and I've just bought a new set of discs and pads, not because they're worn out, but because they got so rusty that they're really noisy and they won't pass a roadworthy because I'm about to sell it. And obviously electricity is much cheaper, as I pointed out. So when you're trying to buy an EV, what sort of considerations might you want to have? You'll have your own list. This is just a set of items that I've come up with over the years. And this is what, you travel less than 50 kilometers a day, anything will do it. If you travel 400 Ks a day, even a Kona would do it. Model Ioniq 5 would do it. MG ZS EV, you would have, that's a ZS EV, not a ZE, I made a mistake there. The MG, you'd have to basically do a couple of DC fast chargers during the day, so it might not be suitable. So that's basically the sort of things you'd be looking at. The other things, do you want to tow? The Ioniq 5 does, Kona does, the MG does actually, I should amend that as well. It has a 500 kilogram rating. Again, all of these things on these fact sheets that you'll see there, I list them, and I write these fact sheets, and they're posted freely available on the Australian Electric Vehicle website, and they are available through that, and I do monthly update of all of the summary of them. So it has battery size, its range, type of vehicle, so VFACTS categories, large SUV, medium passenger, whatever. and the current on-the-road price. I generally do avoid trying to put in the so before on road costs. It's a bit like drip pricing. You say it just costs this, oh, we'll just add a bit more for dealer delivery, we'll just add more for rego, we'll just add more tax. So I always put, if I possibly can find, the on the road cost, and I base those on Victorian ones purely because that's where I live, but it's roughly the same in other states. It's just double check. So within a few $1,000s, you'll be about there. Now, so that's a standard sheet, and on the back of it is all the cars coming in the next 6 to 12 months. If you want to go there, it's ava.au/fact sheet. Oh, as mentioned early at the start of this, I do list my email address in the last slide, and it'll be put up in the chat as well. You can email me for these slides, and Renew will also be putting these slides up not long thereafter. And there's also a double-page fact sheet on every model. They're all exactly the same headings, so the whole idea is you can compare directly each car on its charging speed, its range, and I list the 3 NEDC, WLTP, US EPA ratings on those sheets. And also wrote an article, which is probably just about due to be updated, as a what, why, when guide to buying EVs in Australia. Same deal for second-hand cars. Again, you'll have your own criteria, and I actually run second-hand fact sheets as well. So as each model becomes second-hand, that's my old Leaf. I use a picture of my own old Leaf. And I'll just the things to look at when you're buying second-hand. And there's a number of things if you're looking at, say, something that's been brought in from overseas rather than a direct Australian delivered vehicle, and there's a number of notes there. Practicalities of the considerations. Well, current switchboard, if you've got one of those switchboards, I'm an electrician by background, although I don't do much electrical work these days. When I see one of those old grey federal boards, I just cringe. They're virtually impossible to do any work on. So if you've got one of those, you need a new switchboard. It's not the car's fault, it's just time. You need safety switches and things anyway, apart from anything else. Renew Edition magazine, edition 143 for those who subscribe to Renew, it's in there. And also on my website, I put up Renew articles relating to these. Somewhere off street to charge. It's not impossible to charge in apartments and things. There are solutions for it, and that's been discussed in other Renew magazine articles. But yes, yeah, off street is very handy, and that's my original Leaf charging off a tethered lead EVSE. Electricity tariffs. If you've got a high peak rate during the day and a low off-peak rate during the night, you're obviously not going to charge during the day. The same for if you have a high feed-in tariff from your solar panels, you would prefer to use the off-peak. Just check your peak and off-peak rates to see when is the best time to charge. And sometimes you can choose different tariff structures depending on your supplier, in which case, just look carefully. Electric vehicle supply equipment capacities. If you've got a solar system, there are some that will actually sense the amount of power being put out by the solar and will ramp the car charging up and down. So you can say, I want all solar, 50% solar, or stuff that I need charging now, so just ignore the solar and just recharge at full whack. And there are chargers that will do that. They're available. And there's an article on what do you call it, EVSE buyer's guide in Renew about a year ago, a year and a half ago now. And you'll need to buy the BYO lead, as I mentioned earlier, for using those council type chargers, about $220 for one of those leads. And a higher power one, if you're doing the Leyland brother effect out of off the beaten DC track, one of those 3-phase chargers with a few adapters to go into pretty much any outlet is a very handy thing to carry. I also list those articles on my website, evchoice.au. You'll see EV information. Find out more. Australian organisations. Renew, obviously, is a very good one. It's always at least one EV article. There were going to be 2 in this month's, or this quarter's one. I put in 2, but I've actually got a really good issue coming up on getting off gas and a whole lot of information coming up. So the bigger of the 2 articles have just been bumped to the following edition. And that was on electric light commercial vehicles. So next, so what's this, the mid-year one? The September one will actually have a whole lot on light commercial vehicles and a number of articles in the past. January to March last year, checking second-hand EVs. I did EVs on the horizon. End of last year, I said the EV utes and vans will be not the one coming out in June, but the one in September, actually October. Australian Electric Vehicles Association is another source. That's the website there. If you want to pop onto the forum, which is free to join, Australian Electric Vehicle Associations, where those fact sheets I mentioned are kept. If you look at that screen there, you'll see the second item across is EV fact sheets. That's the tab. And the forum, you can actually join there, and as in just free to join, just register, and you can ask questions of a very knowledgeable bunch of people there. Australian websites for getting information. You've got The Driven, which I write for. You've got the Electric Vehicle Council, as they proudly put on the very front of their page, they represent the electric vehicle industry. So they represent the big end of town. So yeah, there's a slight level of taking a couple of things that they say with a pinch of salt, because they are the industry view of the world. But they have some very useful information, not to disparage them. But just remember, they do come from a particular point of view. And you also have my own website, where I said I have the various aspects of the work that I do. And those sheets, you see EV information, that fourth item across the top there. That's where these articles and a few other things are actually there available for download. I think at that point, I've just come out to 8 o'clock, which is the time I was to wrap. So I think I've done that relatively well. If you want a copy of the slides, evnews@bigpond.com. I'll leave that up there for a moment. If anybody's got some burning questions, I think there'll be people putting things in the chat, and I'll unshare, because that email address will be in the chat line. So we'll stop there. Hi all.
Hello. Well, thanks very much, Bryce. That was a lot of great information. And I've personally been in the market for a new electric vehicle, so I was waiting for this webinar to learn more and see what I can do. I've learned more things I should consider, so that's great. And there's lots of very good questions in the Q&A. So we've got some of these we're going to try and ask as many as we can. So please keep adding in your questions, but there's already a lot there. And if we don't get to them, we'll be capturing them all, and we can put them out in other communications later.
So Bryce, someone asked, why are plug-in hybrids worse than petrol cars?
It's a short and a long answer. The short answer is they're a bit like Dieselgate, where they've sort of gamed the system, but they're on the right side of the regulations. If you go to the AVA website, there's actually an article that I put up there, which I wrote for The Driven late last year. So it's actually, the full detail is in that, but it's basically they're nowhere near as good on fuel efficiency and fuel economy as the numbers provided by the manufacturers.
Would that be a good transition cost, though, if someone can't afford an EV straight away?
I would say if their current petrol car is still going, a lot of the plug-in hybrids are quite big, heavy cars, so they would probably find they'd use more petrol than they would if they kept their current car. If, on the other hand, their car is about to die, and they can't afford a full petrol, then choose the right plug-in hybrid. As I say in the article, you match the plug-in hybrid to your circumstances, and it's very careful use case scenarios you have to work out to see whether it will or won't work. Then they will work. And if you need a car that's that big, if you need a sort of a bigger SUV type car, which most of the plug-in hybrids are, then that's fine. It's just if you're driving a small petrol car around and want to go to a bigger SUV plug-in hybrid, you're going backwards in terms of fuel use, servicing, weight on the roads. There's a whole lot of criteria. Overseas, the plug-in hybrids are certainly dying in terms of their sales numbers.
Yeah, and it looks like someone's found the article you mentioned. I was hoping someone would. So if anyone wants to learn more about the plug-in hybrids versus EV, I'm sure it's in that article. Is that correct?
I can see LOL Hummer going electric and someone. I had the same reaction when I first saw it. I just burst out laughing.
Oh, all right, here's another question. I've heard you shouldn't use regenerative braking on long trips. Is this true, and why?
There's nothing wrong with using regenerative braking, but I tend to, in my car, I can set it at different levels. On long trips, if you're rolling down, basically you set it to a level that if it's undulating country, if you lift your foot off, the car will just roll at the right speed, so it won't lose speed going downhill. Otherwise, you're sort of pushing your foot up and down on the accelerator a bit, which can be a bit more tiring. There's nothing wrong with it nothing wrong for the car to do that. It's just, it can be a little more tiring pushing the accelerator back and forth a bit more. So if you just back it off a little bit, if you turn it off entirely, you'll tend to find you just roll faster and faster and faster downhill. It's actually, give you an example, when I was doing my EV long weekend tour back in 2019 to prove they didn't ruin the long weekend, I drove around Victoria, did 2,400 Ks in 7 days. Melbourne to Bairnsdale the first day, Bairnsdale over Mount Hotham through to, we forget the name of it, Myrtleford. When I got to the top of Mount Hotham, my original aim was to get to Albury, but by that stage I was getting very tired. So I decided I'll stop short. But even then, I was going to be 50k short of Albury, according to the range estimator. I'm going, oh. Then I realised I'm at the top of a very large hill. I've got regenerative braking. By the time I got to the bottom of the hill, I had 50 to the bottom of the Great Divide. I had 50 k's more than I needed to get to Albury. So my electric car refuels itself going downhill. It was, I was amazed. I went from 52 short to 52 much. And then I stopped in Myrtleford anyway because I was exhausted.
Yeah. The next question someone had was that do fast charging DC chargers damage the battery in some batteries?
The short answer is almost certainly not. They find that electric vehicles being used as taxis or whatever, there doesn't seem to be any difference in the battery degradation. Teslas, for instance, are losing 0.5 to 1% per year in range. If you've got a 500k range car, if you lose even 1% a year, so say 10% after 10 years, you've lost 50 k's. And at 50 k's, you've got down to 450. For most people's usage, you're not going to notice, and it's gradual, so you probably just change to stock 50k shorter and recharge anyway. So A, the batteries do last. B, they don't seem to be, with EV taxis and things, they don't seem to be going downhill faster. This came about as the early Leafs did have an issue, and to some degree still do. So they call it Leaf, or is it Chargergate, where you charge, say, a 40 kilowatt Leafy drive, Adelaide to Melbourne, for instance. Your first DC charge will do it at full pace, and then the second DC charge, it throttles itself back to about 15 kilowatts.
So is it still a good idea to keep trying to top up your battery even though it's not drained? Or
at the moment, when there's not as many DC charges as we'd like, it's sort of charge early, charge often. So my Melbourne to Sydney trip, for instance, I could stop pretty much every third or fourth charger. I didn't need to. So I would stop at the charger before I would have really needed it, just in case it wasn't working or was crowded. Never happened, but it's just a charge early, charge often. But it's basically what suits you. Every 2 to 3 hours is a good time to stop. Anyway, so if you just say every 2 hours, whatever charger I'm nearest, I'll stop there.
Yeah, there was a few questions around that, about whether you should, is there a best percent full to start charging, or like how low should you let it go before you charge it again? And this could be in relation to people that use it every day for work, for example, rather than a long distance where you kind of have to keep it topped up. Yeah,
if you're going to work and back and it's just day to day, it's like a petrol car. You don't run it below about 1/4 of a tank, and you don't fill it right up because the petrol goes stale. For electric car, between 20 and 80% is the right numbers. So don't just keep it above 20%, and take it up to 80% for DC charging in particular. For some battery chemistries, the LFP batteries that are in the BYDs and some of the Teslas, they actually say charge them to 100% all the time.
Yeah.
So, but just for the sake of, you don't want to accidentally run out of, you don't go below 1/4 of a tank of petrol. Don't go below 20% in a battery car, because that's the one time you're going to not find a charger, or you left the charger at home, or something went wrong. And that's, we've all run out of petrol. I think I've run out of electricity in 12 years. Once, I think twice. Once was deliberate, because I was trying to flatten my conversion battery, and I flattened it, just not quite home. And the second one was in the IMEV, when I made a mistake going to Bunnings, and I drove to one that was 10 k's away when I had 16 k's left of range, when I thought I was going to one that was 4 k's away. I just didn't think. I got home, but it was in turtle mode, and I was doing 15 kilometers an hour down the last little bit, and rolled down my street and rolled into my driveway to recharge.
Yeah. So this next question's about home charging. So if someone has solar and battery storage at home, is it a good idea to charge your car from a battery storage?
There's no reason not to, but basically your car is an extra battery, so you can use it once your battery's fully charged in the home storage system. Keep charging the car, and then if you've charged the car, keep heating hot water. Use your electric hot water as another form of battery. It's just a matter of just using your own solar to best effect. It's whatever works for you. So there's no reason not to charge it off the battery, but given that extra battery, why not just use it and just keep topping it up? It really is very much horses for courses. So if they find off grid and they're charging the car off the battery, there's nothing wrong with that. It is a little bit of losses in efficiency because you're using a loss into the battery and then another loss into the car. It's only 5% each time, so it's not a huge loss, but it is a little bit extra loss.
Yeah. And just for the people that are asking about the recording, we will send out a recording to people who have registered, not straight away, probably in a few weeks once we've uploaded it, but it'll be available on most of the council websites, or if not, your regional climate partnership website. So on a follow-up question on battery storage at home, what are the other barriers to utilising vehicle to grid besides the nature of the charge plug? And when do you anticipate these barriers might be overcome and at what cost?
You can, in South Australia, be part of a trial to use the CHAdeMO. There are a number of trial CHAdeMO vehicle to grid, vehicle to home systems. They are very expensive. They cost about $10,000 for the box plus installation, and you have to be part of a trial to put one in. And the ACT is the same. The CCS system will become available. The cars will be capable of it starting next year. First of the cars will start becoming available with that built into it. And then it's purely a matter of A, people building the boxes that go in the house, and B, our supply authorities, being their usual slow selves, to finally agree to let us connect them. So 2025 will be when they eventually agree to let us connect them. And then it will be a matter of 27 or 28, I guess, before you get a reasonably priced one.
Yeah. There's a few questions about what happens to battery at the end of life. So what are the impacts of this, and are we in a place to replace them? What's the environmental impacts of when we need to replace them, and what's our plan to deal with that right now?
That's a great question. EV batteries are not like phone batteries. They don't die 1 minute after the 2-year warranty runs out. They have an 8-year warranty. In California, they're pushing to make it a 10-year warranty. And basically, Tesla say that their batteries will last the life of the car. Depends on how long the life of the car is. If it's like an Apple phone, it might only be 2 years in one day. Sorry to all Apple. I didn't mean to disparage them. But Tesla say that they should last 10, 15 years plus. The whole point of a battery in the car is it doesn't die. It actually just becomes, it has a higher internal resistance. So as a result, it doesn't like the high acceleration and recharging. So they're very good to pull those batteries apart and then reassemble them as home storage systems. So they get another 10, 15 years of life in that. So it might be 20, 25 years before they actually need recycling. So we're only halfway through that stage. Renault, for instance, have set up several 10 megawatt battery backup systems, and they use their old Renault Zoe batteries, as well as a whole pile of new ones that they've made that they can keep for warranty replacements. And they basically, as a unit, they just built plugs, and they just forklift them into these units, and they just plug themselves in, and they sit there and they work perfectly happily long after they wouldn't be any good in a car. And then there's the recycling after 20, 25 years. Interesting point about the recycling. Nissan said they were expecting to start recycling their batteries now, and they're saying that it isn't yet economic to do it because the batteries are still in the cars. They're lasting longer than they thought.
So that's the end of life. So what about the impacts of making them at the start of their life, manufacturing, what the emissions impacts are?
Two-part question. The batteries are relatively good for recycling. So I think that the numbers I've been hearing 93 to 96% recyclable. So all your plastics, all your rare earth elements. I keep saying that in inverted commas because a lot of them aren't rare. They're just a little harder to extract. And they haven't bothered looking too much for them until recently. So they're relatively rare until they fall over them. And so that's the recycling end of it. They are recyclable. And when it's economic to do so, there'll be people starting to recycle and beginning to now. Tesla, BMW, and one other company are actually signing contracts to basically set up recycling systems. And the other part of it is Tesla have actually said that by 2050, we won't be digging up massive amounts of lithium anymore. It'll be effectively a semi-closed loop where most of the lithium comes from recycled batteries, and it's just a top up from the mining. So what little bit gets lost will be topped up by the mining, but it won't be vast clouds. So we'll have basically a store of lithium that is being cycled.
Yeah. All right. Our next question kind of relates to the reuse of battery, I suppose, but what's the resale value like on electric vehicles?
At the moment, pretty good, because more people want them than there are available. So the prices are higher than I sold my old Nissan Leaf 3 years ago for 12 grand. That thing would probably be worth about $15,000-16,000 3 years later. It's just nuts. So they're holding up quite well. When there's more vehicles on the market, they're finding overseas that they are following the normal depreciation curve, was about 20 or 22% or something a year. They're back to normal for a vehicle. But they are a new technology. Exactly how they're going to depreciate, I don't know. Vehicles have had 100 years of depreciation. So I think we could probably expect that the EVs will do much the same thing, but that's my crystal ball gazing rather than knowledge.
Yeah. The next question is about servicing costs. Are they actually really less than the ICE vehicles in the long term? Because they're thinking about, given the weight of the battery, things like the tire, suspension, and other things will need to be replaced more often. And do you have some links to the data to these comparisons?
Electric vehicles are not that much. This is a urban myth. Electric vehicles are not that much heavier than the big SUVs glumping around our roads now. They're around 2 tons. So it's a couple of 100 kilos more. So maybe 10-15% heavier. So it's not a huge amount heavier.
Yeah.
Pardon me. And this myth that the EVs chew up tires is due to all the Tesla owners, because there's lots of more Teslas around in Australia, for instance, than anything else. And they're very powerful cars, and Tesla owners a bit of a lead foot, to be honest. So they tended to chew their tires and replace, and they're very expensive performance tires on big rims and big tires. So they're very expensive tires. So they're getting a bit of a reputation for chewing tires. My Kona still has the original tires at 60,000 kilometers, and they're nowhere near wore out. So they're not wearing out any faster than a normal tire as far as a normal EV. As I said, it's just all those lead foot Tesla drivers are giving EVs a bad name.
And I'm assuming with less parts, like mechanical parts in the EV, the overall servicing cost would not be more than ICE vehicles then.
No, you don't have timing belts anymore. You don't have oils. You don't have spark plugs and air filters and all that annoying guff that goes with a petrol car or a diesel car. You don't have diesel particulate filters clogging up because they're driving around town only. Electric car loves short trips, as opposed to a diesel or petrol car, which short trips kill them.
Yeah. All right. Now I have a few that are linked, so I'm grouping them together. So I'll do them quickly. Camping trips. Can someone use a solar array to charge while they're out and about?
Short answer, no, unless it puts out 240 volts.
Okay.
And even then it would need to put out minimum of, I think, 1400 watts to reach the minimum threshold for a car charging. Reverse, though, is can you use the car to power the campsite? Yes. A vehicle to load.
And have enough to get home.
Yes. You can set with the Hyundais and the Kias, which is the same platform. You can actually set the minimum level. So if you want 25% battery left to get back out to the first charger, just set that as a floor, and then the power will turn off when you hit that. But it would, for a normal campsite, I think I did the calculations, it would be 3 to 4 weeks before you flatten the battery.
Okay, so that brings me to the next point, which is what people have been experiencing, even if you have not, Bryce, which is they rock up to a station, a bank of stations, and they're all being used, or some of them are faulty. This range anxiety is going to impact people's decision to get them, especially if it's their main vehicle and they want to be able to use it in daily commute, as well as those longer term weekend drives and camping trips, etc. So do you see any are there any issues with there not being enough, or there not being enough at each site where people are likely to stop? Or is it about drawing power from that particular site? Is there a minimum amount of power that can be drawn? Talk us through some of that.
One is the paradigm shift. You go to a petrol station or a EV charging station for domestic day-to-day use. 90% of that, so that's all home use or workplace charging. So 90% of that range anxiety disappears when you don't have to use them anyway. B, when you do use the DC fast chargers, often enough, when there have been relatively large numbers there, I've pulled in as someone's pulled out or someone's pulling in as I'm pulling out. With the faster charging cars, they would be, people only stop at 10, 15 minutes. So if you only one car in a queue, it might be a 10-minute wait. So it's not that bad, but that's, as I said, in the worst case scenario. And in overseas, they will not put in, basically, they're finding you don't put in less than 6 chargers at a site. Unlike here, where we often have 1, and they do break down. I have been caught where I turned up and the charger was broken.
Do you have to have the specific app for the specific brand of charger to tell you whether or not it's working or not? Or is it?
2 parts of that question. Yes, you need a specific app to get the charger to work. And no, it commonly doesn't tell you when you turn up and it's not working, even though the app says it does.
Okay, so there's still some technical difficulties that need to be ironed out.
So we're still at the beginning part of the curve, especially in Australia, where we're selling, I think, at around 7% of all new car sales. In overseas countries, UK, Europe, a lot of these teething problems have been passed by, and they're working it out. Like, they don't build sites with less than 6 chargers, because people are finding, or they're finding over there, people won't stop where there's a site of only 1 or 2 chargers. So they're actually underutilized because people think they'll be crowded or they're broken. So,
well, if that's been people's experience once, it can, as you know, we've seen in the chat a few comments like that.
And I would agree that they are. The problem is when there's a single charger site and something wrong with it, you're stuffed. You just got to go find a AC charger. So look up PlugShare and find the AC charger, or a power point for a while. The local council dunning block, if all else fails.
Speaking of local councils and what they might have to offer, Kim, do you want to explain an event that's happening on the 19th of November?
Yeah, so Resilient East Councils, so all the councils in the eastern suburbs, but everyone's welcome. But we are hosting a electric vehicle showcase. So on the 19th of November, so we'll be having lots of car dealers who will be on site to showcase their electric vehicles from all different brands, including plug-in hybrids. As well as the AVA will also be involved. So they are one of our partners, and there will be some, so you'll be able to talk to car dealers as well as EV owners. So you get, I guess, an unbiased view from everyone. And also we'll have speakers that will be talking to you about what SA government's plan is for electric vehicles moving forward, as well as some myth busters and that sort of topics. So come along if you are interested.
Yeah, and that obviously is not an event to be invited to just at this minute because it's in November, but if you sign up to our mailing list, you will find out about it, or you'll hear about it in the future. So put that day in your calendar if you know you're still going to be in the market for an electric vehicle in that period of time. Okay, we've got 6 minutes left, so we've got several more questions. Someone said, can a car charger be put on the controlled load tariff? Yeah, that's that one.
Depends on the state. Correction. Depends on the state. You'll have to, I know in Queensland, they insist on it. Unless if it's more than 20 amps, it must be on a controlled load. In Victoria, some of these companies are offering a off-peak type tariff at a controlled load. So it very much depends on the state and the supply authority.
Okay, great.
Someone was asking also, can you explain why you think hydrogen cars won't be anticipated to take off? Because some of us are expecting, I guess, at least hydrogen will be replacing heavy vehicles, maybe.
Multiple answers to that. Maybe heavy vehicles, except that electric trucks are already hitting the road faster than fuel cell hydrogen cars. In Australia, we have currently 4 refueling stations for hydrogen. We have, well, I'd hate to think how many PowerPoints are in Australia. You should want to get that picky about it. That's the difference. It's just like I have done in my presentations. It's who here has seen the film Who Killed the Electric Car? and about basically the issues at the time, why it died then, back 30 years ago. And I predict that long after I'm dead, and anybody that's young here, sort of in their 20s, in 2080 there'll be a film coming out called Who Killed the Hydrogen Car? That will be its time. At the moment, we need 3 to 5 times more electricity to produce the hydrogen to go the same distance as it is to plug in a battery car. So if we want to use green energy to power our transport, hydrogen is a very bad way to go. Electricity use for cars won't break the grid. It's about 10% more electricity required with a managed EV charging network. For hydrogen, we'll multiply that by 3 to 5 times, and you can see what damage it would do to our trying to get off fossil fuels. So that's 2 of the reasons. Third reason, as I said, was just the availability. It's just like petrol versus electricity at the start of last century. Electricity was only in the CBDs, petrol could be taken everywhere. Electricity is now everywhere. Hydrogen is at 4 places in Australia.
All right. Maybe this is our last one. Would there be a long-term strain on an EV battery if you were to use it for the home's main power source when the sun goes down?
That's a really good question. What Nissan was saying for their vehicle-to-grid systems, because they do allow it to be used, the warranty still applies exactly the same.
Great. And someone wants you to write an article about hydrogen vehicles as well.
I have written one.
You have, of course you have. Maybe Jamie, our friend is on the line, we'll find it and add it to the chat. One more maybe. A friend of mine in Holland has told me about swap and go battery systems being introduced, where you go into a service station and they replace your battery with another fully charged within 5 minutes. Mm-hmm. Can you see that happening here?
It was tried here. A company called Better Place decided to try that model. They put together a consortium and put together $6 billion worth, and Better Place has now gone to a better place. It went with $6 billion worth, getting the car manufacturers to agree to the right size battery and the same size terminals when they barely can agree that a wheel is round. Surprises me that they can even agree on that, even though the wheels are different sizes and offsets and you name it. Getting them to agree on a battery size, so when you turn up wanting a particular battery and it's waiting there fully charged for you, out of all the hundreds of options there could be, I'm very surprised that it will ever take off. I always thought that when Better Place started. It didn't surprise me when they went bankrupt. And the Chinese are the ones pushing that model again now, and they're starting to release some of those in Europe. They have a more command economy. They can mandate that sort of thing, which in the Western countries, it's like herding cats. You've got no hope of getting the manufacturers to agree on something like that. So there may be some of the Chinese cars coming with it. I suspect they may end up going the same way as Better Place.
I guess our time's up, but thanks so much, Bryce. To everyone else on the call, you receive a follow-up email and survey to fill out. Please do this straight away while it's still hot on your brain. But the next webinar from Renew here is buying green power. So if you're interested on like what it involves, jump on that. It's on the 4th of July, and then All Electric Homes webinar, which is on the 25th of July. So tune in and tell your friends.
Okay,
And there's going to be,
I might butt in on one. I saw something about FEVs and range.
Yep.
I'm not sure if I mentioned it at the time, but FEVs in particular, they often quote the NEDC number for the range. So people often find they don't get the range that they're advertised with because it's an NEDC number. Australia uses NEDC, and the manufacturers commonly will quote NEDC numbers for range, particularly for a FEV. So you will often not get the range with it.
okay. Thanks for answering that one. There was also some questions about secondhand vehicles, and I know other people have answered them in the chat, so thank you very much. We are out of time. Other events happening around Adelaide as well, besides our wonderful webinar series. Look at your local council, your regional climate partnership website, your environment centres, not just about energy and electricity, but it's a good time to get tree planting and look at what's in your garden as well. So everything around sustainable homes is important for us. There's actually a Sustainable Lifestyles Expo on the 24th of June, which is supporting home designs and improvements, and that's we'll send a link for that round afterwards, so you can check out if that's something else you're interested in. I think that's it. So thanks very much. Fill out your survey. In a few weeks' time, we'll follow up as well with the link for the webinar when that's ready. And you can also watch the webinars from Winter Comfort if you didn't already and your house is cold and you want to figure out how to make it warm. Please check out that webinar. And we're being vacuumed out of this room. We better turn off our sound. Thank you very much, everyone.
Thank you.